chemotherapy and conclusion, adjuvant gefitinib as first reported overall survival result of phase 3 trial. It was EGFR mutated patients versus in the standard chemotherapy in patients with N1 and N2 non-small cell lung cancer. This was study which showed that overall survival was 75.5 months in gefitinib group versus 62.8 months in chemotherapy arm. However, this didn't reach a statistical significance. But if you compare this data from the historical data, the adjuvant gefitinib group was one of the best as far as the overall survival is concerned. And then, if we look at the updated median DFS, which was 30.8 months in gefitinib group and 19.8 months in chemotherapy group, though there was clear-cut DFS advantage, but it didn't translate into significant overall survival advantage. And point to be kept in mind is more than 18 months of gefitinib definitely gave better overall survival. The next point would be the subsequent TKI therapy still got a higher response rate and disease control rate, which may contribute to longer overall survival in either of the gefitinib or chemotherapy group. So, adjuvant conclusion is adjuvant EGFR TKI should be considered as optimal modality to improve disease-free survival and achieve potential better overall survival in R0 restricted N1 and 2 patients with EGFR mutated non-small cell lung cancer. Thank you.
Thank you, Rishikesh. That was so lucidly explained, and I'm sure this will be discussed well in our discussion post. Now I call Dr. Atul Sharma. Dr. Atul Sharma is alumni of All India Institute of Medical Science, and he is presently working as a consultant at Indraprastha Apollo Hospital. He will discuss the CM-227, nivolumab plus ipilimumab in non-small cell lung cancer. Dr. Atul, are you there?
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir, I am here, sir. I am not able to share my screen.
Okay.
Yeah. Now I am able to.
So, just a request to the speakers: once the presentation is finished, please stop sharing option.
Okay, I think we are all learning these etiquettes of Zoom platform.
Very true. Yeah. Eventually, we will all be mastered in Zooming.
Yes. So, Atul.
Very good evening to everybody present on the platform. I am going to present this study, which is Checkmate 227. This study deals with the combination of nivolumab, that is nivo, plus ipilimumab, that is ipi, a purely immunotherapy-based combination versus platinum doublet as first-line treatment in advanced non-small cell lung cancer, that is both adeno and squamous histology. Not able to move the slide. Yes. So the background introduction. So both the drugs, nivolumab as well as ipilimumab, they are the immunotherapy combinations, complementary actions, but with distinct mechanism of action. So they took PD-L1 positive, that is more than 1% population, as well as PD-L1 negative, that they excluded EGFR and ALK positive patients, and patients with brain metastasis, they were only included after the brain metastasis were addressed with radiation. So the results of this trial has already been presented. This is long-term 3-year survival analysis, as well as these are the results of the part 1 study. This was a multi-part randomized trial. So this is the schema of the study. So they divided the population into 2 parts. as vis-a-vis PD-L1 expression. That is more than 1% PD-L1 expression and less than PD-L1 expression, which further received three treatments. So Nivo-Ipi combination was common to both the parts, chemotherapy was common to both parts, and the single agent nivolumab was given when PD-L1 expression was more than equal to 1%, and Nivo chemo combination was given when PD-L1 expression was less than 1%. They also explored another biomarker, that is the tumor mutational burden more than equal to 10 mutations. So this has been recently approved by FDA as another agnostic marker for the indication of immunotherapy. So both the groups were comparable as far as baseline characteristics are concerned. So this is the overall survival, Nivo-Ipi arm versus chemotherapy in PD-L1 more than 1% subgroup. So Nivo-Ipi arm faring well, 11% absolute survival benefit at 3 years. So this makes Nivo-Ipi an option in the first line treatment with advanced non-small cell lung cancer. So this is the overall survival update of all the three arms. Again, Nivo-Ipi combination faring better than the chemo versus Nivo alone. This graph shows the overall survival in the other subgroup, that is the part 1B, where the population is PD-L1 less than 1% or negative. Again, Nivo-Ipi doing well in this subgroup also. So this is interesting that Nivo-Ipi is doing well even in a PD-L1 negative population. On the one hand, it is encouraging to see better results, and the absolute benefit is almost double. 3-year overall survival for the chemotherapy arm alone is 15%, and the combination is Nivo-Ipi combination is 34%. So, but on the other hand, it confuses you that is the PD-L1 the real predictive biomarker for the combination, or ipilimumab is the drug which is making some difference, or there is some other biomarker in the PD-L1 negative population that can predict the response to the immunotherapy combination. 3-year PFS, again, both the graphs in both the population, PD-L1 more than 1% and less than 1%, Nivo-Ipi combination doing well in all the subgroups. Again, in the terms of overall response rate and the duration of response, again, Nivo-Ipi combination doing well as compared to the other options. So they did this exploratory landmark analysis also. This is to somewhat it is interesting that they analyze the response at 6 months. So those patients who are having CR or partial response, they continue to do well in long term also. So those who had a response CR or PR at 6 months, 70% of them they continue to do well at 3 years also. But there was a catch that in this they excluded the death in the first 6 months. So if you have a good response to immunotherapy combination at 6 months, so maybe you are one of those who will continue to do well in the long term also. And this is the same post landmark overall survival responders CR and PR at 6 months. So you can see among the PD-L1 positive subgroup, those who had a response at 6 months, the survival was among them 70% continued to do well at 3 years. And among the PD-L1 negative population, those who had a response at 6 months, either PR or CR, 82% of them they continue to do well. So this is overall survival at, those who did well in both the groups, PD-L1 more than 1% or less than 1%, if they were not doing well at 6 months, they continue to perform poorly in the subsequent time also. Coming to the safety, so Nivo-Ipi combination are almost doing well. The safety is comparable with the chemotherapy arm. The only concern was numbers are a bit higher in the Nivo-chemo combination. They might be having a more toxicity. Again, this is the timeline of the adverse events. So most of the adverse effects, they are early on and during the first 6 months. Subsequently, the incidence of immunotherapy adverse effect goes down. So we have this immunotherapy and Nivo-Ipi, another combination, a chemo-free combination. Maybe this is an option for the absolutely chemo-free immunotherapy combination in first-line treatment of advanced non-small cell lung cancer. We already have pembrolizumab and recently atezolizumab also in the more than 50% PD-L1 positive subgroup. So this may be an option in the 49 to 50, more than 1% subgroup, but they included population which was more than 50% PD-L1 positive. So this constituted around 50% of the chunk of the patient. So maybe the effect is driven by that population. So they have not analyzed separately for more than 50% and 49 to 1%. Availability of the drug is an issue. The drug is not available in our country, and patients having less than 1% PD-L1 expression showing response makes us to think that is PD-L1 a true biomarker. How to predict long-term survival? I mean, those patients who continue to do well in the long term also. So their analysis, one of their landmark analysis was that he so maybe this is this combination Nivo-Ipi combination is an option, a chemotherapy-free option in the PD-L1 1 to 49% subgroup. Thank you.
Thank you, Atul. And you really explained it very lucidly. And for the next abstract, which is Keynote 604, pemetrexed platinum and etoposide, pembrolizumab platinum and etoposide in extensive stage small cell lung cancer. I think I'm sorry. I think the third speaker is Dr. Piyush Bajpayee. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Yes.
You are audible.
Yeah, so next speaker is Dr. Piyush Bajpayee. Dr. Piyush Bajpayee is a senior consultant of medical oncology at Manipal Hospital. He did his DM in medical oncology from prestigious RDR Cancer Institute, Chennai. And he's very sharp and academically always on top. One of my favorite speaker. He will discuss Caspian, that is durvalumab and tremelimumab in platinum and etoposide in extensive stage small cell lung cancer. Dr. Bajpayee, please.
Yeah, thank you for the kind words, Dr. Panda. Can everybody see my screen?
I can see.
Yes, we are able to see. Can you please switch on the presentation mode?
Is it not on the presentation mode yet?
No.
Okay. Is it on the presentation mode now?
No, not yet. We can actually, we are able to see your desktop screen with your ribbon at the top.
Okay.
I think we can start with this, right?
Okay, we can start. No problem.
Can you see now?
Yeah, just make it a full screen. Yes, okay.
Yeah.
This is perfect.
Yeah, so we know that this particular malignancy, small cell lung carcinoma, especially the extensive stage, is a very bad malignancy for medical oncologists so far. However, for the couple of years that we are seeing some progress, which was static for almost nearly 3 decades. So there was atezolizumab making a dent earlier, and now in last year, Caspian trial was discussed in ASCO, and durvalumab in combination with etoposide and cisplatin or platinum demonstrated a significant improvement in overall survival. So this was approved by the US FDA in March 2020 as a combination. And here, this ASCO 2020, it was durvalumab plus tremelimumab arm along with the chemotherapy arm, which was presented, which was compared with the standard chemotherapy arm. So there was earlier interim analysis done last year itself for this particular arm as well, and overall survival, which was the primary endpoint for the whole trial, was analyzed. So here again, the Caspian study, where treatment naive extensive stage SCLC, small cell lung carcinoma, were treated, and here asymptomatic or treated stable brain metastases were permitted with a life expectancy of more than 3 months. So these were the 3 treatment arms, as you can see. But the etoposide platinum combination alone, 6 cycles were allowed. Then it was only chemotherapy, and PCI was optional. And with the immunotherapy arm, the chemotherapy was just 4 cycles, and Durva was 1500 mg every 3 weekly. So thereafter, it was continued till progressive disease. So the statistical analysis was slightly tweaked. The alpha error was actually decalculated when they got the encouraging interim analysis for the durvalumab plus chemotherapy arm. So they actually then raised the bar higher, and final analysis was planned at 80% maturity, and nearly 438 events across the durvalumab and tremelimumab plus EP arm and EP arm was considered. The p value was they had raised the bar, so it was less than 0.0418. They had to meet to make it a statistically significant p value. So this was the baseline characteristics. You can see the red box. The males were more in the CTLA4 and PDL1 combination along with chemotherapy. And again, if you look at the brain metastasis was slightly more in the triplet arm, and liver metastasis was slightly more in the triplet arm. So this was eventually that ongoing durvalumab analysis was actually nearly 11. The triplet regime, nearly 11% patients were on the ongoing durvalumab arm, and PCI was given in nearly 3% of the triplet combination, and received subsequent anti-cancer therapy. Well, more than 2 lines were received in nearly 12% of the patients, as compared to 19% in the durvalumab and EP arm versus 18% in the chemotherapy arm alone. So, to just tell you that CTLA4 was just till the 4 cycles, the chemotherapy cycles, and then durvalumab was only continued. So, looking at the treatment exposure, this was the distribution. Many patients got carboplatinum, as most of us do practice in extensive stage, and median number of cycles were 4. Immunotherapy, nearly 23 weeks of durvalumab was given, and median number of durvalumab doses was 6 in the maintenance arm. So looking at the primary endpoint, and here, since they had raised the bar, but you see that the p value was 0.045, and it fell short of what was actually planned for, 0.0428. So in particular, if you look at the brain metastasis and the liver metastasis, these are not doing as good as they are probably. These are doing not as good as was expected. So again, PFS was not very different, though this was not the planned analysis, because PFS was, as per the hierarchical design, was to be done only if the primary endpoint was met. So again, this was not met. So coming back to changing gears towards the second arm, the durvalumab only arm with chemotherapy versus chemotherapy, which was encouraging and got the approval last year. And this they presented further data on this, and nearly 3 months of difference in overall survival was actually seen. So there is nearly a hazard ratio of 0.75, nearly a 25% benefit. Earlier it was last year 27% benefit. Now it is 25% benefit. And the forest plot showing most of the favored, most of the subsets favoring the durvalumab combination. So again, progression-free survival, and if you look at the tail of the curve, definitely at 12 months, nearly 17%, and at 24 months, nearly 11% patients were on durvalumab alone. So, yeah, the safety summary, if you look at this, then the grade 3-4 adverse effects were more once the tremelimumab or the CTLA-4 is added to the doublet, the chemotherapy and the durvalumab, and grade 3-4 effect, side effects, and the immune-related adverse effects were more. So, in conclusion, basically, durvalumab and etoposide platinum now is one of the standard of cares in extensive stage in small cell lung carcinoma, because of the sustained improvement in overall survival. This year also the data is now there. So hazard ratio of 0.75 and sustained separation of overall survival curves with 22% versus 14.4% of patients alive at 24 months. However, the addition of CTLA-4 to durvalumab and etoposide platinum combination did not significantly improve the outcomes. So these results further support the use of CTLA-4 and etoposide platinum as the new standard of care treatment for first-line extensive stage small cell lung carcinoma. Thank you.
Thank you, Piyush. Now, without wasting much time, I invite Dr. Prabhat Singh Malik, a dear junior. Professor Malik is presently working as an associate professor of medical oncology at All India Institute of Medical Science, Institute of Liver Institute, Rotary Cancer Hospital. He is also the in charge of lung cancer clinic there. He will speak on keynote 604, pembrolizumab, cisplatin etoposide in extensive stage small cell lung cancer. Dr. Malik, please. Prabhat, are you there?
Department, am I audible? I'm there.
Yeah,
am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
I think Piyush has to first stop sharing his screen.
Okay. Piyush, can you do that? Just.
Piyush, can you please stop sharing your screen? Hello?
Prabhat.
Yeah, great. Just give me a moment.
Yeah.
Is it okay, Prabhat, now?
Yeah, it's fine. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, I think you are visible.
All right. So there could be some internet connection problem, and if you don't my voice clearly, please you can just write in the chat box. Probably I would get an idea whether I'm good or not. Hello.
Yes. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Prabhat.
All right. So let me start. So as Piyush has already mentioned that small cell lung cancer, they have really not big change over last couple of decades. And if you remember, in any of the conferences, including dedicated lung cancer conferences, small cell lung cancer used to be like maybe in a single talk or sometime not even a single talk on small cell lung cancer. And now you can imagine like two back-to-back abstract being presented and discussed on small cell lung cancer. It means there is really a significant change. So I'm going to discuss this keynote 604 trial, which tested the addition of pembrolizumab to platinum etoposide combination in small cell lung cancer. This was presented by Charles Woodin from Sloan Kettering. So far, we have two combinations which are approved along with the platinum etoposide doublet, that is atezolizumab and durvalumab. Durvalumab, as mentioned in the previous abstract. Now, the pembrolizumab has also been tried in the first-line combination. This was the trial design. It was all extensive stage small cell lung cancer, treatment-naive patients, good performance status. In this trial, they excluded patients with unstable brain metastasis. They had stratified these arms for the platinum used and the performance status and the LDH. Patients were randomized between pembrolizumab along with platinum doublet versus placebo along with platinum doublet. And maintenance was continued 31 cycles, both in pembrolizumab and placebo arm. In placebo arm, obviously, it was the placebo which was given as maintenance. This was about statistical consideration. There were basically two interim analyses done for this trial final analysis. I don't want to confuse you here too much about the statistics. All we need to remember that the primary objective for the primary endpoint for this trial was PFS as well as overall survival. So for PFS, we need to remember that we need to have a p-value below this, 0.006, and for overall survival to be significant, we need to have this p-value below 0.019. So here, these are the calculation, the threshold which they did for the interim analysis, because for every interim analysis, you have to spend your error. And so they kept a separate p-value threshold for PFS as well as overall survival for interim analysis as well as for final analysis. Looking at the baseline characteristic, both the treatment arms were well matched. As you expect that majority patients receive carboplatin, which is much more easy to tolerate in patients with extent and slightly more preferable because of the side effect profile, particularly in extensive stage. This is the consort diagram. 228 allocated to pembrolizumab, 225 to placebo arm. In the experimental arm, almost 8%, 9% patients are still ongoing, versus 0.4% which are ongoing. Looking at the progression-free survival, the second interim analysis, which was presented here, you can see the median progression-free survival was better with the pembrolizumab arm as compared to placebo arm, although the difference seems very modest, but it was statistically significant. The p-value was 0.0023, which was lower than the previously set threshold. Similarly, at the final analysis, also they saw the statistically significant improvement in progression-free survival. Numerically, it looks quite modest. However, on the overall survival analysis, although you see a numerical improvement, 10.8 months versus 9.7 months in the placebo arm, although you can see the p-value seems statistically significant, but as per the set threshold, these threshold limits were not met. If you look at the subgroup analysis, although you see number of the subgroup seems to have PFS benefit, however, in overall survival, the trend is more towards pembrolizumab, but the statistical significant value comes only for a few. The same for response rate. Pembrolizumab arm had a slightly higher response rate, particularly more partial responses as compared to chemotherapy alone, and the duration of responses were also higher. Adverse effects rate were slightly higher in pembrolizumab arm, particularly the immune-mediated side effect. However, there was no fresh concerns about the toxicities. To summarize, that addition of pembrolizumab to standard platinum etoposide doublet to first-line therapy significantly improved PFS. However, it favors an overall survival benefit. However, it did not make the set cutoff for p-value. So we cannot say in statistical term that it improved overall survival. However, there is a trend towards better overall survival. So this combination provided durable results, and safety profile was there as expected from a chemoimmunocombination. So we can only say that pembrolizumab has a value when you add it to platinum doublet in terms of improvement of progression-free survival. If you compare these results with the available options, like we have atezolizumab along with platinum doublet, the result seems in the atezolizumab and durvalumab arm, in statistical term, there is clear overall survival benefit. And so was the PFS. Numerically also, atezolizumab arm seems to be doing slightly better, but this is a cross-trial comparison which has its own limitation. This durvalumab trial has already been discussed by Dr. Piyush. Again, the primary endpoint for this particular trial was overall survival. In the last year publication as well, there was statistically clear benefit in terms of overall survival. Thank you. I think this is clear.
Okay. Thank you, Prabhat, for so nicely analyzing this. Now, switching gear, we have next two abstract, will be on radiation oncology. So, for the first abstract, which is SINDAS study, that is TKI plus radiation in oligometastatic non-small cell lung cancer, may I invite Dr. Dodul Mondal. Dr. Mondal is a consultant in medical radiation oncology at Indraprastha Apollo Hospital. Before coming to Apollo, he was assistant professor in the Department of Radiation Oncology at MCI and AIMS. Dr. Mondal, please.
Am I audible?
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you. Is the screen visible? Is the screen visible?
No,
We can see your hero-like photo, but not the.
not this time.
Okay, just give me a moment. Okay, should be visible now?
Yeah.
Okay. Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Deepanjanda, for introducing me. So, continuing with all these very interesting trials, I'm going to present a trial by Shao Shan Wang from Sichuan province, China. It's a study on first-line tyrosine kinase inhibitor with or without aggressive upfront local radiation therapy in patients with EGFR mutated oligometastatic non-small cell lung cancer. It's an interim result of a randomized phase 3 open-label clinical trial, popularly known as SINDAS trial. Now, if we go to the background, the authors have very interestingly put 3 slides. The first one showing the benefit of adding TKI first line, second line, and third line TKI in patients with EGFR mutated non-small cell lung cancer, where the modest survival benefit with first line TKI is somewhere around 10 months, with second generation TKI somewhere around 13 to 14 months, and third generation TKI with something around 19 months. The second slide they have put is the concept of oligometastatic disease. Now, this is a very interesting concept. The oligometastatic disease is considered something which is in between a fully curable disease or localized or locally advanced tumor and a full-fledged metastatic tumor which is incurable. So the concept came with limited number of metastatic disease, where the number of metastases is limited either within 3, popularly as per the European belief, or within 5, when and no more than 2 metastatic disease within a single organ. Now, this concept came when this concept of oligometastatic disease is valid only when all these metastatic lesions are treatable with curative approach. And as of now, there is not much data about the benefit of this approach. And the third slide they have put is from a trial which is published with the full result came in just in last year. It was on local consolidative therapy in oligometastatic non-small cell lung cancer after first-line systemic treatment by Gomez et al. From MD Anderson Cancer Center. It was a collaborative study from three different institutes, and the study showed a significant benefit in terms of progression-free survival and overall survival when consolidative treatment was added to after first-line systemic therapy when the tumor was not progressing. That means a stable disease or responding tumor, all the lesions less than 3 in number, they are treatable and they are possible to treat with a curative approach. They were given local treatment and it showed significantly better outcomes. Such benefit, significant benefit was seen that the trial was, the data monitoring committee stopped the trial in between, and it was found that this actually gave survival advantage also. And the trial actually showed a benefit of almost 41 months overall survival versus 17 months overall survival when local consolidated treatment was given versus not given. So with this approach, this study with TKI plus radiation with SBRT was started. However, this typical approach was used when with TKI and for EGFR mutated patients only. The study criteria included 18 years or older population with performance status of 2 or less, having a life expectancy of more than 6 months, a pathologically confirmed non-small cell lung cancer with EGFR mutation, and all metastatic lesions with a maximum of 2 lesions in any one organ and no more than 5 metastases in total, who can be treated with a definitive approach. They were randomized in 1:1 fashion to either SBRT plus TKI option. The SBRT arm received 25 gray to 40 gray in 5 fractions, and the TKI and the second arm, the standard arm, received TKI. And in this study, they have used 3 different types of TKI: Gefitinib 250 mg once daily, Erlotinib 150 mg once daily, and Ecotinib, which is exclusively available in China 125 mg 3 times daily. And subsequent to treatment, the patients are put on follow-up. The statistical analysis was quite not very complicated. It's a descriptive statistics utilizing CHA2 test, Kaplan-Meier method, and log rank test, multivariate analysis using Cox regressive model. Primary endpoint was progression-free survival, and the secondary endpoint was overall survival. The study was open label and not blinded to the treatment arm. Now, the CONSORT diagram showed that 631 patients were screened and ultimately 136 patients were randomly assigned to both the arms. 68 patients in each arm. However, 3 patients from the standard arm were excluded due to loss of follow-up. So at the end, 68 patients were analyzed in the study arm and 65 patients were analyzed in the control arm. Now, if you can see the baseline characteristics of all these 2 groups, these 2 groups are well matched in terms of the age of the patient, gender, performance status, stage, end stage, EGFR mutation type, number of nodes, and treatment received. The treatment received either in terms of TKI or TKI versus SBRT. Now, after almost 19 months of 19 months of study, the median progression-free survival and overall survival was significantly improved with using TKI plus SBRT. Whereas the progression-free survival was 12.5 months in standard arm using TKI, it was 20.2 months in the study population with SBRT and TKI. And when the overall survival were analyzed, the control arm showed 17.7 months of median survival versus 25.5 months of median survival, favoring SBRT plus TKI. Now, the authors also tried to analyze different factors which made significant difference in the outcome in the univariate analysis. When they analyzed the progression-free survival, 5 different factors were found to be significant in univariate analysis, which included performance status, stage, number of metastases less than 2 versus more than equals to 3, type of mutation, and treatment arms. However, on multivariate analysis, only 3 factors: performance status, the number of metastases, and treatment received was found to be significant. Now, when they analyzed overall survival, 6 factors were found to be significant. All the 5 factors in which were seen to be significant in PFS versus one additional factor, that was end stage. And on multivariate analysis, it was found that performance status, stage, number of METs, mutation type, and treatment assigned all made significant difference in final outcome. Now, what was the toxicity when the grade 3 and adverse events were analyzed? The events were not very high. However, 20 patients in treatment in the treatment arm who received SBRT, they were found to have some kind of events which were grade 3 and more, and in the TKI arm, 13 patients were having grade 3 or more events. Now, majority of these events were actually skin rash, 50% in the treatment arm and 62% in the TKI arm. Now, the authors concluded that this randomized phase 3 study measuring upfront radiation to sites of diagnosis directly contributed to the improvement of both progression-free and overall survival with equivalent toxicity in EGFR mutated oligometastatic participants. The finding confirmed previous hypothesis of a benefit of consolidative SBRT for limited metastatic and non-small cell lung cancer, and the author's findings suggest that aggressive local therapy to sites at diagnosis upfront should be explored further in large cohort phase 3 trial as a standard treatment option in the clinical scenario. Now, the limitation of this study was it's a relatively small sample size, 136 patients in combined 2 arms, 133 patients were analyzed. Role of palliative radiation in the trial was not analyzed, and post-TKI resistance management was also not defined. Now, take-home message from this trial was adding SBRT to standard of care TKI treatment prolonged PFS and OS compared with TKI alone. Adding SBRT to TKI treatment was feasible and was not associated with any substantial increase in the toxicity profile of TKI alone treatment. Although this is an investigational interim report, the finding is suggestive of value in a further exploratory study. Now, the point to discuss in this study that the baseline study, the local consolidated treatment they included for comparison actually included patients having upfront brain metastasis who got treatment and then subsequently included in the study. However, in this study, the authors did not include patients with brain metastasis at the beginning. Secondly, the trial from MD Anderson, they actually randomized patients after the first-line systemic treatment. So patients having complete resolution of multiple metastases, after having treatment, they might be having 3 or 5 metastases, might be having less than 3 metastases, were considered to be eligible for the study inclusion. But in this study, it was not the same. And at the same time, it's very interesting time that a couple of other trials like another trial is going on in European countries in at least 30 centers known with the popular that study is Staron study. Another study, another 2 studies are going on. One is Omega study and another one is perhaps Hall study. So all these studies are currently actually they are analyzing the role of local ablative treatment to primary site and or metastatic sites for oligometastatic lung cancer. It's a very interesting study and maybe one of the potentially practice-changing studies in future. And the Saron study excluded patients with EGFR mutation, and the Cinda study actually excluded all other patients not having EGFR mutation. So this Saron and Cinda is going to be complementary to each other, and we expect the results to be published in another 1 or 2 years, and we'll be having a very interesting time ahead for treatment of oligometastatic lung cancer. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Dodul. Now for our last abstract, I think it is you who should be inviting the last speaker.
Thank you, Dr. Dipanjanda. Now I invite Dr. Rambha Pandey to present the last abstract of this session. It's another interesting study on small cell lung cancer, and I believe we are discussing multiple topics today on small cell lung cancer. Dr. Rambha Pandey is currently Associate Professor in Radiation Oncology at Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Institute, Rotary Cancer Hospital, AIIMS. Dr. Rambha Pandey, please.
Thank you, Dr. Gautam. My screen is visible to all of you?
No, madam.
Yes, now we can see.
Now it is visible? Okay.
Yes.
So everybody can see the slide, right?
Yes, it's perfect.
So I'm going to present an Norwegian Cancer Group study, which is a randomized phase 2 study comparing the efficacy of standard dose radiotherapy in the small cell lung cancer with the high dose twice daily thoracic radiotherapy in limited stage small cell lung cancer. So, in the background, the concurrent chemotherapy and thoracic radiotherapy has been the standard treatment for limited stage small cell lung cancer since the early 90s. And twice daily thoracic radiotherapy of 45 gray is the most recommended schedule which is practiced worldwide. Though in India we are not able to practice, I don't know whether any center is practicing 45 gray in twice daily vaccination, but most of the centers are using single daily fraction only. So, what was the rationale for this trial? So, only 25 to 30% of the limited stage small cell cancers are cured after chemoradiotherapy, and the 22 to 50% of patients experience local failure, which is associated with inferior survival. So, with this in background and with the invent of PET-CT, which is included in staging and then later on the treatment of the lung cancer, during the target volume definition, it allows for omitting the elective nodal radiation, and also the modern radiotherapy techniques reduces the normal tissue toxicity. So with this background, we can escalate the dose to the tumor in small cell lung cancer, also in non-small cell lung cancer. So the author with this background, they also there was a study by Halpist et al., which was published in Acta Oncologica in 2007, which evaluated the role of thoracic radiotherapy in the small cell lung cancer, and they evaluated the role of high dose twice daily thoracic radiotherapy in small cell lung cancer, and they concluded that high dose twice daily thoracic radiotherapy of 60 gray is feasible and safe. So with this background, but there was no randomized trial, and this dose is not tested in any randomized trial. So with this background, the authors hypothesized that high dose twice daily thoracic radiotherapy is tolerable and improve the local control and survival in limited stage small cell lung cancer. So coming to the study design, so this was a 2-arm study in which all the patients were to receive 4 cycles of neoadjuvant chemotherapy with cisplatin carboplatin along with the etoposide for 4 cycles on 21 days interval, and then they were randomized to receive thoracic radiotherapy. In the standard arm, the patients receive 45 gray in 30 fraction with twice daily vaccination, and in the study group they receive 60 gray in 40 fraction with twice daily vaccination. If 60 gray of radiation was not feasible in any patient, at least a 54 gray of radiation should have been done, and if those patients who could not complete even 54 gray were excluded from the study. After the initial response to the chemoradiation, all the patients who had initial response received prophylactic cranial radiation, 25 gray in 10 fraction or 30 gray in 15 fraction. So the eligibility criteria for the study was the histologically confirmed small cell lung cancer of stage 2 or 3 or non-operable stage 1 limited stage small cell lung cancer were included in the study. The patient age was, all the patients were of more than 18-year age and performance status 0 to 2. They should not have received any systemic therapy for small cell lung cancer or thoracic radiotherapy prior to inclusion in the trial, and they should have a measurable disease according to the RECIST criteria 1.1. Also, there should not be any malignant cell in the pericardial or the pleural fluid, if at all there was some pericardial or pleural fluid at presentation. So, endpoint of the study was to assess the 2-year survival, and secondary endpoint was toxicity, response rate, progression-free survival, and the overall survival. So, statistical analysis consisted of in the same group had a previous study where they had 2-year survival for patients receiving 45 gray in 30 fraction was 53%. So, to consider a 25% improvement in the previous survival, a 2 years 25% improvement in 2-year survival from 53 to 66%, at least 75 patients were needed to be included in each arm. So this was the study design, which showed approximately 176 patients were initially screened from all over the Scandinavian countries, and 6 patients were excluded from the study because of either they had extensive disease or they were withdrawn from the study or they had received the prior radiotherapy. So finally 170 patients were randomized to receive either the 60 gray in 40 fraction with twice daily vaccination or the standard treatment 45 gray with in 30 fraction with twice daily vaccination. In the experimental arm, out of 89 patients, only 84 patients could complete the treatment because it was not possible to achieve more than 54 gray in 5 patients. Similarly, in the standard arm, out of 81 patients, only 76 patients could complete the assigned treatment because they had some or the other form of the complication in the form of heart infection, renal failure, etc. So patient characteristics were well matched between both the groups, with the median age being 65 in both the group, and most 58% patients were female. Now coming to the treatment completion, so almost 89.5% patient in the standard arm completed the 4 cycle of chemotherapy, and 88.1% patient in the experimental arm could complete the assigned chemotherapy. 96% of patients in the standard arm, just 45 gray in 30 fraction, completed thoracic radiotherapy, and 96.4% patient in the study arm could complete the thoracic radiotherapy. After the completion of thoracic radiotherapy, 82.9% patient in the standard arm and 84.5% patient in the study arm also received prophylactic cranial radiation after the initial response to the chemoradiation. Coming to the toxicity, so there was not much difference in the grade 3 to 4 toxicity in terms of esophagitis and pneumonitis in both the groups. However, neutropenic infection showed a increase, had a significantly increase in the 45 gray, that is in the standard group. There were 3 deaths encountered during this study period. 1 death was due to neutropenic infection, 1 due to thrombocytopenic bleeding, and 1 was due to aortic dissection. Response rate, so objective response rate was 84.9% in the standard arm and 88.5% in the treatment in the experimental group, with the complete response rate being 23.2% in the 45 gray group and 20.5% in the 60 gray in 40 fractions group. Now coming to the 1 and 2 year survival. So at 1 year there was not a significant difference between the survival between the 2 groups. So in the study group, the survival at 1 year was 92.9%, and in the standard arm it was 85.5%. However, at 2 years there was significant improvement in the survival, with the 2 year survival being 70.2% in the experimental group, whereas it was 46.1% in the standard arm. Progression-free survival. The median progression-free survival was 19.9 months in the experimental group and 14.4 months in the standard group. Now, overall survival also showed a trend toward improvement in the experimental group, and it was also statistically significant. So, overall survival, median overall survival is 41.6 months in the 60 gray, 40 fractions, whereas it was 22.9 months in the 45 gray group. So, to conclude, the delivering 60 gray was feasible in almost all cases except for few patients. Those were excluded from the study. There was a significant and substantial improvement in 2 year survival, with the median overall survival of the high dose thoracic radiotherapy, and the higher radiotherapy dose did not cause more radiotoxicity than the standard dose. So with the modern radiotherapy techniques, we can escalate the dose in the small cell or in the non-small cell lung cancer, and this translates into the improved survival. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rambha, for your nice presentation. And it seems that there are a lot of potentially practice-changing abstracts presented this year, and I really hope that many of these practices will be changed in coming near future. Now, with this, now we will move on to the panel discussion, and to moderate this panel discussion, I'll invite Dr. Kanika Sharma from Dharamshila Narayana Super Specialty Hospital. Dr. Sharma is Dr. Sharma is the senior consultant radiation oncologist and the clinical lead. She is known for her academic excellence. She is an alumnus of Indira Gandhi Medical College from Shimla and did her MD in radiation oncology from prestigious Maulana Azad Medical College. From Indira Gandhi Medical College, and then she did her senior residency from Maulana Azad Medical College. Madam has keen interest for all new fancy techniques, and I request ma'am to take over this session.
Hi. So I start with the customary 2 lines. Am I audible?
Yeah.
And is my screen visible? Can you see my screen?
Yes.
So thank you. First of all, I would want to congratulate.
You can start the slide presentation mode.
Yeah. So first of all, I would like to congratulate Dr. Dudul and the entire oncology classroom team for making this wonderful platform where we are discussing such practice-changing abstracts which have appeared recently. I think it is a great effort on your part, and doing it consistently for the students as well as the faculty. So you do deserve a big round of applause. So without wasting much time, so I have been given the task of moderating the panel for the discussion of these 6 posters which we heard in the last 1 hour. So I have a disclosure that most of these abstracts had been medical oncology specific, but still I will try to see their relevance in context of our clinical practice. So I have with me very esteemed panelists, Dr. Vikas Vittap from Shillong, Dr. Manish Singhal from Indraprastha Apollo, medical oncologist, Dr. Siddharth Sahai from Manipal Hospital, Dr. Harshvardhan Atre from Apollo Medics, Dr. Pragya unfortunately cannot join us today, she had a family emergency, Dr. Charu Garg from Max Hospital, and Dr. Dipanjan Panda from Indraprastha Apollo. So to set the ball rolling, I have a small case to take us through the abstracts for the non-small cell lung cancer. So it's a short case, a 70-year-old gentleman, good performance status, presented with history of cough for 3 months and hemoptysis of very short duration. He was evaluated with an X-ray first, and then subsequently they found something in the lung, and he underwent the endobronchial biopsy, which revealed that it's a non-small cell lung cancer, adenocarcinoma, positive for TTF and negative for P40. His mutational analysis showed L848R mutation detection and negative for ROS and ALK mutation. CT scan showed that there is a lesion in the apical segment of the lung, which was abutting and encasing the aorta, not encasing the aorta, abutting the aorta, with a big subcarinal lymph node and few small pretracheal carinal and left hilar lymph nodes. Subsequently, a PET scan was ordered, which, apart from this lung lesion and the node, also showed that there was a lytic lesion in D1 and D11 vertebrae. Apart from that, a small lung thyroid nodule was identified, which was SN8 and did not show any evidence of malignancy. The routine MRI also picked up a very small lesion in the brain, which had a disproportionate surrounding edema and was deemed to be metastatic. So I will start off by asking Dr. Harshvardhan, what would be the treatment line you would like to offer to this particular patient?
I think this patient has significant brain edema, which needs to be addressed first.
Dr. Harsh, can you please be a little bit louder?
Yeah.
Can you...
Am I audible now?
Yeah, much better.
Yeah. So this patient is having a large lung tumor along with the brain metastasis that needs to be addressed first. So I would like to start with the brain addressed modality. So in options, I think I find the second option with SRS brain and TKI. But if the patient is symptomatic enough and mass effect and these kind of things are there, I think we should go for neurosurgical intervention first if the single lesion is there. If the patient is not much symptomatic, only edema is there, then we can go for the radiation modality first. So my option with available options, my best option is second one.
Right. So patient is asymptomatic. The brain lesion was picked up incidentally on the MRI, which was done for the staging purpose.
So second option is okay with me.
Oh, okay. So Dr. Singhal, any difference of opinion, or you would still want to continue what Dr. Harshit has proposed?
Yeah, so if the patient is a candidate for osimertinib, I mean, affordability permits the usage of osimertinib, and patient is not very symptomatic for spinal mets and the brain mets, I think TKI alone is a fair option.
Okay. And Dr. Panda, do you concur?
Yeah. So the only thing is that I would have agreed with Manish, but the cervical spine mates, it's not something I'll be very comfortable living around. So most probably TKI, in that case, osimertinib would be my preferred choice. With SBRT spine and observation of brain lesion is an acceptable solution. The reason I may not, I agree with Harshvardhan that we can give an SRS to brain, but if it is a very small asymptomatic incidental pickup brain lesion and we can use osimertinib, then I can leave the brain lesion alone at this time. But if I do not have access to osimertinib, if I have to use other first generation TKI, then I'd be giving SBRT to spine as well as SRS.
So you prefer the third option. Dr. Charu, would you be happy treating this patient just with a PET, or you would want to take a call by ordering an MRI of the spine and then decide upon the line of treatment?
Yeah, so Kanika, I would want an MRI spine to see how stable or unstable the spine is and whether the patient is symptomatic with it or not. So I think by the time we have the report of adenocarcinomas and we have ordered all the lung panels to come in, we have got a pretty good 8-10 days in between, and that would give us enough time to treat the SRS brain single fraction and SBRT spine if it is unstable, painful, or if we see that it is going to compress, it is like fecal sac indentation or pot compression, something is there, then in all these within 8-10 days we can finish this all and put the patient on the TKI.
Okay. So this is in context with our SINDAS trial abstract. So since they have proposed to have addition of SBRT to TKI is giving a lot of advantage. I think the abstract has been wonderfully presented, and it did highlight that on the multivariate analysis, addition of TKI to SBRT to TKI is impacting the CFS as well as OS. So, as Dudul also said, there are multiple other trials looking into the same scenario. The Ceron, the Omega, and the HALT trials will have their results in 2021 and 22. So, do you think we are defining oligometastasis rightly? What exactly is oligometastasis for non-small cell lung cancer, ma'am? Dr. Charu.
So, I think in 2019, the Pan-European, they got together and they came out with a definition of oligomets. And now we know that there are a lot of, further categorization of oligomets, it's synchronous, metatonous, oligoprogression, recurrence. So they define synchronous oligomets, which we generally see. And they said that this is basically the number of mets which can be treated definitely and definitively with a local therapy, and they would have an impact on the outcome as well. And they said that the number of lesions should be 5 and in 3 organs. So that is what it was, and they excluded the the pericardial, pleural, bone marrow, all these lesions, they were excluded from the oligometastatic stage.
Right. So it is important to first define oligometastasis, because many a times the decision of treatment is defined by our correct definition. So, does this, Dr. Jagtap, does this SBRT impact the treatment outcome more than any other palliative
Kanika, can I interrupt, please?
Yes, please, surely.
So, if you look at the study also radiated the primary.
Yes.
So, are you proposing that we radiate the brain lesion, the spine lesion, as well as the primary and give the TKI in this particular patient?
So, Dr. Charu, would you take that?
I think no, in Sindas they didn't treat the primary. Sorry, I couldn't get who was speaking.
Dr. Singhal. It was Dr.
Dr. Singhal. Dr. Singhal. So,
primary.
no, so I was checking that they have given only SBRT 25 to 40 grade to the C25 grade to 40 grade. So normally in the lung, if it was a large lesion, it would be difficult to give an SBRT. The Gomez trial, it was there in 2016, they did give radiation to the primary.
I think, to my understanding, they did give the radiation to the primary as well.
As my analysis also, I could not see primary in the Sindas. Probably that Gomez trial, maybe that because that slide was given prior to the Sindas. Probably it might have gone through your site, and you might be recalling that. So, Dr. Jagtap, what would be the advantage of SBRT per se in context to other palliative form of treatment? So, if you are to counsel a patient with a surgery for spine or a radiation or palliative radiation, what advantages would SBRT offer?
Compared to surgery, obviously SBRT will be a non-invasive process, and with the adequate high dose radiation, we can achieve the same control rates compared to the palliative dose radiations. The only issue is when you are giving high dose SBRT, if the lesions are quite large, then that could be an issue in giving high dose, because then the dose will be compromised. Otherwise, these patients, unless and until the spine is stable, SBRT will be quite good enough modality instead of surgery in these cases.
So you do employ some criteria by which you decide which patient goes for SBRT and which goes for the conventional palliative radiation?
Generally, the conventional palliative radiation, I'll prefer what are the dose volumes and whether the disease is near the central disease or the peripheral diseases. So those things will definitely come into play. And what is the general condition of the patients, so that will also come into play.
Okay. Dr. Charu, do you want to add?
Yeah, I would like to add here that SBRT definitely scores over palliative. And there was a randomized phase 2 trial where the complete response rates of SBRT were almost 5 times higher at 6 months than what it was at with the palliative radiation, 30 grade 10 fractions. So, I mean, if we can deliver SBRT like the case you presented, we can definitely give SBRT to this patient, and it would have a complete response, a better complete response as compared to the palliative one.
So, anything about the biological basis? There's a lot of talk about the milieu which SBRT impacts more than the palliative.
So we all know, first of all, is like that SBRT, radio resistance, which is there in seen a lot of cancers. SBRT, because we are giving such a high dose, it overcomes that radio resistance. And then the different mechanism of action. And I think one which is upcoming in like melanomas and lung is the abscopal effect. I mean, many times when we have to use this targeted therapy, our medical oncologists, they want us to give SBRT to 1 or 2 sites, so that this abscopal effects get activated. And
anything you would want to share from your experience about the abscopal effects, because most of our centers are now doing SBRT in these particular situations. So do we really see them, or it's just there in our books? Dr. Singhal, are you there?
Sorry, yes. Did you ask me? I didn't get your question.
Any real life cases where you could actually observe abscopal, because it is highly talked about. So have you experienced patients showing response after SBRT?
As far as lung cancer is concerned, I don't really think I have ever seen any abscopal effect in reality. Yeah, I agree that there are studies around this, and there are various hypotheses that this can work. Okay. But in the era of immunotherapy, perhaps yes, more so, but not really in the real sense that I would say that I have seen an abscopal effect as far as lung cancer is concerned in real practice, not really.
Okay, so I've kept Dr. Siddharth silent for a while. Dr. Siddharth, now this is for you. What would be your sequence of TKI and SBRT if you plan to treat the patient with both the modalities?
Good evening, ma'am. Ma'am, first SBRT will be a better thing because we have already discussed the abscopal effect also. So but I think SBRT should be the first thing, followed by TKI.
Your voice is not clear.
Siddharth, can you be a little louder?
Hello, can you hear now?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Hello, can you hear now?
Yeah, go ahead.
So Dr.
Hello.
Siddharth has concurred with the paper. He has proposed early introduction of SBRT with TKI. So any of the panelists disagree? Dr. Harshvardhan, what is your take?
Dr. Kanika, I have my objections. So
Okay.
we are really weighing very heavy on this particular paper. It is just a 130 patients, randomized to two different arms. First line EGFR TKI used, and you randomized to SBRT. We are not even clear whether they gave some consolidative radiation to the primary as well, and given only SBRT to various lesions. Our definition of, oligometastasis is not very clear. Do you really think that it is so practice changing?
So I think as Dr. Charu also pointed out, you have a reasonable time interval before you actually start your chemotherapy. So if there are sites where you can give SBRT, how does the SBRT,
I would like to refer, our capability to give SBRT should not be, should not appear as that it is practice changing. I know that we can give SBRT, but is it really going to benefit the patient?
Here, if I can take that, Kanika?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So there were, these two trials which I'm going to quote is again of the SRS with stage 4 non-small cell lung cancer, and it was again a retrospective study of approximately around 351 patients, and that came out in JCO in 2017. So they had divided the patients about 100-120 in each arm, and it was like SRS followed by TKI, whole brain followed by TKI, and TKI alone till progression happened. And the median overall survivals were different by almost like where SRS followed by TKI, the median overall survival was 45 months, vis-a-vis TKI where the overall survival was just 25 months. So p-value was very significant. So they concluded that SRS should be given upfront. And
the
then
retrospective study, Dr. Charu, retrospective study is fraught with a lot of biases. The better performing patient receive the SBRT, and the less performing patient doesn't receive the SBRT. I know this is a JCO publication. It was accompanied by an editorial also. So agreed SBRT if the patient is oligoprogressing, yes. If the patient is real oligometastatic, yes. But this is not an oligometastatic patient, is it?
This is an oligometastatic patient.
I think we should go ahead. I think there are some objection, but this is at least in theory we can say that SBRT and TKI can work. Maybe we will wait for a bigger trial. As far as this particular case is concerned, we can always debate whether it is the apt case, but I think at least in liver I can say abscopal effect is a known thing. In large hepatic tumor, we do give radiation as well as along with drug, and we have seen nivolumab with radiation work in small studies. Yes.
So I think Dr. Singhal wanted the way Gomez et al. Did it, but I think we move forward. We have 5 more abstracts to be discussed.
So
we can endlessly debate on SBRT and TKI. So what if there was a slight difference in the mutation analysis and this patient turns out to be negative for EGFR? Dr. Singhal, what would be the line of treatment now for this patient?
So if there is PD-L1 positivity, what is positive? Means 1% or 50%?
That is one of my questions ahead, so that is why I left it blank.
So PD-L1 positive patients, even if they are not really PD-L1 positive, our general choice is immunochemotherapy. And that's based on the Keynote 189 study, which has shown survival benefit, even if they are PD-L1 negative. Of course, the hazard ratio changes as the PD-L1 positivity increases.
So any of the medical oncologists differ, or all are in
that is the option we give, not that we are able to use it for everyone.
No, but I agree with Dr. Singhal that chemoimmunotherapy actually works. I mean, I have closely followed up 3 patients, and two of them did really well beyond my expectation. So they do work irrespective. If you have a PDL1, they do better. If you have not so high PDL1, they do okay, but they still, I think, do better than only chemotherapy.
Dr. Dipanjan, can I ask one thing?
Yes.
So, have you followed these patients with the maintenance therapy altogether, or they were given only 4 to 6 cycles of chemoimmunotherapy and then observed? So how these two kind of groups they actually behave?
So among the 3 patients, 1 patient we could give pembrolizumab for 1 year, and rest 2 we have to stop after 6 months. And the person we gave it up to 1 year. After that, the company represented they said we cannot give. So he's presently only on pemetrexed maintenance, and it's 2.5 years. He doesn't have any disease, so he's radiologically CR. He's a 32-year-old engineer, so he's extremely doing well. His PDL1 was 70%. Rest 2, unfortunately, disease progressed after 20 months. We lost one of them.
Yeah, so we're discussing this in context of this abstract which was presented today, where nivolumab and ipilimumab were versus a platinum doublet were tested. And this is the plethora of chemotherapy which is available in the non-small cell lung cancer treatment landscape. So if we were to select amongst these, Dr. Panda, it's your turn again, what would be your selection criteria in deciding chemo for this PD-L1 positive metastatic non-small cell lung cancer?
Well, madam, if I it is easy for me now because EP is not available in India, and and with my experience, I usually go for pembrolizumab, cisplatin, pemetrexed, especially if the PD-L1 is high. If we go for the chemo trial, we have seen this group really did very well if you have a high PD-L1. Although even if PD-L1 negative, they also did well, but it was not as good as with high PD-L1. So my choice would be, I think, PEM and
so, yeah. So as for this NCCN also, the nivo and ipilimumab has been offered in some certain useful circumstances. So can we define which are these certain circumstances where nivo and ipi can be offered? Dr. Siddharth? Dr. Siddharth, you there?
I think Manish can take this. If Siddharth is not available, Manish can take.
So what's the question, Dr. Kanika?
That NCCN says that nivo-ipi is for certain circumstances. Very categorically, they have put certain circumstances. So what is that subgroup which they feel that nivo-ipi should be offered?
So patients who are not candidates to receive chemotherapy for one reason or the other, and are candidates to receive nivo-ipi type of combination. So, you know, the CheckMate 227 study has seen many series. So they kept on changing the plan and the treatment. They kept on looking at various variables, you know, the PD-L1 positivity, PD-L1 negativity, then randomizing to chemotherapy, nivo chemotherapy, nivo-ipi or chemotherapy alone. So overall the study was positive, but you know, there is so much confusion in this particular study to derive proper conclusions. It's very confusing study. Moreover, we don't have the experience of using nivo-ipi. So it is like 4 cycles of nivo-ipi and then continue on nivolumab. And if you look at the data set shows that be it be any PD-L1 positivity, nivo-ipi may work. As a matter of fact, if the PD-L1 positivity was more than 50%, actually there was the 95% confidence interval across the unity line. So it's a very confusing overall study with too many questions to be answered within the same study. So as of now, I don't really
think you've answered these 2 questions. Yeah. So does PD-L1 expression and the percentage of expression affect treatment results? That I think this paper did.
So any amount of PD-L1 positivity will benefit from nivo-ipi. That's the confusing part of this particular study. As a matter of fact, if your PD-L1 expression is too high, you may not actually benefit as per the study.
Okay. So, is there a case for selecting responders versus non-responders at 6 months, as they were very nicely showing that the ones who responded at 6 months continued to have a very good response at their
there is no doubt that is the fun of using immunotherapy. That those who are responders, their duration of response is very high, and they continue to respond. And perhaps people are now talking of cure in stage 4 lung cancers. So once you have a response,
benchmark, or can we wait for 9 months?
No, it's nothing like that. If you are a responder, then you're likely to keep responding. That's exactly what is demonstrated over here.
But
So
for
Dr.
non-responders.
Dr. Konika, can I just pitch in?
Yes,
if you may?
sure, sir. Sure, sir.
So basically, what we have understood right now with our limited knowledge, that people who respond to immunotherapy, we are not very sure whether PD-L1 is the right biomarker or not. We are looking for the right biomarker, but from our clinical experience, we know people who respond to immunotherapy, they continue to respond most probably due to the T memory cells. So the great thing about immunotherapy, unlike chemotherapy, is that the chemotherapy response is sort of a switch on and off. Once you stop, after some time the disease progresses. But in immunotherapy, once the response, even if you stop immunotherapy, like my patient, the long-term response, because of the memory T cell, it seems to be continuous. So patient who responds to immunotherapy, we expect them to do well in a long time, much longer than what chemotherapy can provide.
So what I intended to ask was that if there is a non-responder at 6 months, so do you wait or assess for response after 3 months, or you call it off and change your line of
Turkey একদম খুব close.
See, if a patient doesn't respond within 6 months, it is, if he progresses on immunotherapy in 6 months, I do not think that. After 3 months, if it's just progression, we still wait for another 3 months. But if there's 6 months, patient doesn't respond, I don't think it's going to respond in long term. But I think Dr. Singhal can, or other Siddharth can give his example.
But Siddharth, you're there?
I don't think
so. I think Dr. Siddharth is not here because I cannot see him in the list. Might
Because I cannot see anybody else.
Dr. Kanika, if you look at these results, PD-L1 negative, that is less than 1% patients, are having a better survival with Nivo-IP combination. It's very difficult to reconcile with this information, right?
There are a lot of.
How come PD-L1 negative patients are responding so very well, and PD-L1 more than 1% are not responding well to Nivo-IP combination?
So that
perhaps PD-L1
actually
negative patients are the ones who are likely to benefit more from Nivo-IP.
No, I think Manish, it is all other way around. People, they are trying to say people who less than 1% PD-L1, if they
are having 92% survival at 30
they
months.
continue to do well. They continue to do well.
So
there must be other biomarkers. So other biomarkers. There basically say PD-L1 may not be the best biomarker.
If you look at the results, more than 50% was even worse.
Yes.
So can we use this, Dr. Harshvardhan, can we use this regimen as an alternative to chemotherapy, as a stopgap maybe?
You are asking about the chemoimmunotherapy or in this
immunotherapy.
Nivo-IP versus chemotherapy.
Yeah.
So I think it is too early to say that. Ipilimumab, we don't have any experience with that. And chemotherapy, but still I would like to give, if it is available, I would like to use Nivo-IP combination against chemotherapy. Data is suggesting that, but I think we should wait a little bit more with the data and then decide about this thing. But as of now, I think it looks very good, Nivo-IP combination against chemotherapy.
I think someone was raising a hand. Please unmute yourself, and if you have any question, you can ask in between.
Well, I cannot see any other. Please keep a track if somebody is asking the question, because I do not see anything other than my presentation.
Yeah. So someone raised a hand, and I'm requesting him to please unmute yourself and ask the question. Okay, I think you can proceed. Just a small comment to answer Dr. Singhal's question. The Sindel study, actually the inclusion criteria was to have a primary which can be amenable to ablative treatment either in the form of surgery or radiation or some other kind of ablative treatment. And the total number of 5 metastases that was including that primary, so that was inclusive, that was in the inclusion criteria. So any primary which is not fitting this criteria was excluded from the study.
Thanks. I think so. We move on to the next one. So now, does the targeted therapy also fit into the adjuvant setting? That was one of the interesting abstracts which was presented today. So we have again a plethora of trials on adjuvant chemo, and I think we have established the indications. And these are the drugs to choose from. So Dr. Deepanjan, I again give the ball to you to decide what adjuvant therapy do you prefer in a post-op case of non-small cell lung cancer who is node positive but resection margins are clear.
With node positive but resection margin negative, you mean to say, right?
Yes, yes. Adjuvant chemo. Which chemo would you choose?
I generally use cisplatin plus pembrolizumab if the patient is young and fit. If the patient PS is not so good, I usually use paclitaxel with carboplatin. But in that case, I generally not give 4 cycles, I give 6 cycles.
Okay, okay. So then this alternative which has been discussed today, the gefitinib as an alternative to chemotherapy in the same situation, do you believe, Dr. Singhal, this abstract is actually practice changing?
I've already changed practice based on it.
Is it? So all medical oncologists are in sync with this practice changing abstract and will treat
I'm
all
sure many would not be.
No, Kanika, I think this is very important. And what it changes is that we are now looking at mutations. Even in resectable patients, we are looking at mutations and AGS upfront. We are trying to see the disease biology in not only in a metastatic disease but also in a potentially resectable curable setting. We are trying, because ultimately we are understanding, we are getting a deeper understanding that whatever you do, if you do not have a good tumor biology, you are not going to. So you would like
permission. With your permission, one thing, I think one important abstract which is presented in the plenary session, osimertinib in adjuvant
we will be
treatment.
Talking about. Yeah, we will be talking about.
So that further reinforces this. I will have to go. The TKI is standing on at our door of our clinic, and we have to take it up. We cannot just wait for long.
Dr. Siddhar has rejoined. He had some networking issue. He has rejoined with us.
Okay. Dr. Harshvardhan, I'm reframing the question. So, do you think all the subgroups will benefit from gefitinib, or you would still want to go with a combination chemotherapy in some subgroups?
I think I have not gone through the study as of now, but as far as I have seen the abstract, and I think I am more inclined to give this adjuvant targeted therapy to these kind of patients now. But I think I would like to be more careful about that after reading it first.
So, this is again a hypothetical question, and I think whosoever would feel free can take it first. So the combination was tested with vinorelbine. So the other combinations which you've been using, like Dr. Panda chose platinum with pemetrexed, that hasn't been tested. So would you extrapolate this study and carry on to change from pemetrexed to gefitinib?
Yeah, I think we can.
No, I don't think so. We can extrapolate. The thing is, vinorelbine is no longer used also, even in some metastatic settings. So we have to take with a pinch of salt. We have to see. It is very difficult to extrapolate. I agree. It is very difficult to extrapolate, and I still think chemotherapy should be given. It is still the data, but might be in near future we may be able to use it.
I think Prabhat Singh Malik has given a chat that it only delays the disease and doesn't improve cure rate, and clearly no improvement in OS. And Dr. Malik also feels that 18 months of JF in adjuvant setting may not be easy. So I think we buried some discussion.
Dr. Kanika, one can give beyond 2 years. In CTOM 1104, they give it for 2 years of gefitinib. And in case the patient is at a significant risk of a relapse, perhaps one can extend it beyond 2 years also. We know that we have used gefitinib and it can go for years on without any toxicity. So one can extend it, and it's worthwhile delaying the progression or a relapse.
No, but Dr. Kanika, I think Prabhat's comment, or Prabhat Singh Malik's comment, merits some discussion that it only delays the disease and doesn't improve cure rate, and clearly there is no clear improvement in overall survival. Is that if I remember that's it? It didn't did it show a significant?
I think it did show OS benefit, which was.
But it was not statistically significant.
It wasn't.
I think it was numerically superior, but it did. So I do not know whether it will be practice changing or not. It is definitely worth trying, but tomorrow if I ask everybody to change like that, I am not very sure.
But would not the patient have a better quality of life with the oral agent in comparison to a combination chemotherapy if OS is not much of a difference?
Well, you see, the chemotherapy is for 4 months. You have to take at least 18 months of Jefferson. So the duration is also long.
Well, treatment duration is less with chemotherapy. TK is given long. So I'm not sure about quality of life. We cannot compare, I think.
I don't think there are patient-related outcomes supporting this,
Yes,
so I
yes,
think that
yes.
should add on to our difference. So, Dr. Singhal, what are the other options of TKI? Is gefitinib the drug of choice, or we do have something else in the kitty?
There are a lot of studies going on. We have studies with Alchemist, which is perhaps using some other drug also. But osimertinib, the ADAURA study was presented this time in ASCO, which shows a tremendous benefit in terms of disease-free survival. I think they gave it for 3 years, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, so I think osimertinib has also sneaked in too, and it will be the head-on, alternative to gefitinib. But probably the cost, if you take into account.
I just want to interject. We did consider ADAURA to discuss, but I think for Indian context, the cost of osimertinib is 1.5 lakhs versus 5,000 for gefitinib. So knowingly, but I am sure this is an important issue. But
so I think it is the reach or the ability to give the agent is which makes a difference for the Indian context.
Dr. Kanika, can you hear me? Dr. Kanika, Dr. Piyush.
Yes, please.
So just a point that in the post-treatment CTOM, probably there was this in this slide that 17% only got osimertinib. So with such a few patients receiving osimertinib post-progression, I think so it would not be the real-world practice, a reflection of real-world practice.
Yes,
so,
I totally agree. So there are many more agents. Any take on erlotinib, Dr. Panda?
I do not use erlotinib for the very reason I have found erlotinib, the side effect of erlotinib in my practice is more than gefitinib. So that's a pure list. There are people who can differ, but I generally am a little reluctant to use erlotinib. I prefer gefitinib. I find them better tolerated.
So as Dr. Singhal pointed out, Alchemist is also going to give a lot of answers in context to these agents. So Dr. Siddharth, are there some biomarkers which can help us in selection of cases for adjuvant therapy?
Dr. Kanika, the problem with the RADIANT study was that it did not select the patients. They gave erlotinib to everyone. Okay. So only in the subset of patients with were EGFR mutation positive, there was a disease-free survival benefit. But RADIANT was an all-comer study.
Okay, so that is why I asked that what is the importance of biomarkers when you actually selecting adjuvant?
Ma'am, actually, biomarkers are important. They will help in deciding the type of agent used, and also they will help in guiding us for the better treatment prospect. Like EGFR, if mutated only, then we can give some other TKI inhibitors. ALK, only if there is ALK positive, only then we have to give. Otherwise, there is no other thing.
So there are a number of other markers apart from the primary mutational analysis which may help us predict in future which would be the ones which derive better benefits from these things. So I think now we need to change our gears because we have an entire second part of our talk. And as pointed out by somebody else also that we were hibernating when we were thinking of small cell lung cancer for the last 3 decades, but now we have a very big basket to be choosing. the drugs we want to give and the techniques and the doses of treatment we want to deliver in terms of radiation. So this is the current treatment landscape paradigm which the NCCN says that you have a combination systemic therapy when you talk of extensive stage small cell lung cancer. But now there is a collective data, and we will be talking in the next two abstracts, that it is a chemoimmunotherapy induction which is now the preferred approach. So, Dr. Deepanjan, what all are these additions to the chemotherapy backbone? What all drugs have actually sneaked in the last 1.5 years? Dr. Panda, are you there? Dr. Harshvardhan, can you take that? I think Dr. Panda is not here.
Dr. Panda is there. I think might be having some network issues. I think
Dr. Harshvardhan, can you take that question? I cannot see the screen. Dudu, is there some network issue?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can just hear
you. So I
you.
do not have any network issues.
Right.
I will take this question.
We can hear you.
Somebody else is there.
Dr. Singhal, can you take that question? Because I'm unable to.
Atezolizumab is very well established now. The Checkmate 133 study showed a 2 months overall survival benefit. Not to say that we have used in a lot of patients, but then it's definitely there. Durvalumab study, the Caspian study, we don't have a regulatory approval on that because perhaps the OS benefit was not statistically significant. But yeah, atezolizumab is very much there.
Yes, so there are a lot of immunotherapy options, and atezolizumab and Durva are the key ones which have been highly talked about. So, what combinations of chemo and immuno are you using in your clinic, Dr. Singhal?
So, this garden variety chemo, platinum with the VP16, that is etoposide, with or without atezolizumab.
Okay, so Dr. Kanika, I'm so sorry. I think there's some problem with my mic. I inadvertently put it there. So I agree with Dr. Singhal that we are still using the good old cisplatin etoposide, and though atezolizumab is available, but somehow I don't think it is widely used because of cost. Same problem we'll have with Durva. The cost will remain an issue, but yes, now we have much more options. So chemoimmunotherapy.
I agree with both of you because this is what this is being talked in the West also. Even they give drugs as per the provider preference and insurance coverage. So it's not just the Indian struggle to get the drug, but it is worldwide. And it's also mentioned that when you do give Atezo, then use CE. And when you are using durvalumab, you can use CE or PE. Either one of them is equally effective. So these were the drugs which we can offer. And as you see here, atezolizumab is one of the preferred chemo combinations as per the NCCN also. So any contraindications, I could figure out these two. Dr. Harshvardhan, any contraindications in your clinic where you feel you would not want to give the drug? We don't talk of finances. What would be the reasons not to give the drug? Dr. Harshvardhan?
I think Dr. Harshvardhan is disconnected. Someone
Dr.
else.
Dr. Siddharth is there?
Dr. Siddharth joined, and I think he is again.
I think Manish can take this call.
It is going to be the Apollo discussion.
I think today we are having more connection issue than yesterday.
Even connection is on a Sunday, other than doctors.
Manish, I think you can take this.
Any type of history of immune autoimmune disorders. I'm not sure about neurological paraneoplastic syndrome, with whether that would be a autoimmune disorder or not. It is a sort of autoimmune disorder, but it is cancer related. So perhaps you can give 1 or 2 cycles of chemotherapy if the patient approves. And then you can add on to the immunotherapy drug also.
Perfect. So, these two abstracts, the Caspian and the one with Pembro, I think it was beautifully presented, and which came out out of this abstract is that tremelimumab addition does not actually add to anything. So Durva still remains standard of care, but then how does Pembro fit into the picture? So, Dr. Panda?
Well, I think the keynote 604, at least whatever data we have, it doesn't raise my confidence level to use Pembro with cisplatin etoposide. I mean, I would, if I have to choose, though cross trial, but if I have to choose, I think I would go for with durvalumab as far as the data is concerned. But I think the data with Pembro plus cisplatin etoposide, I mean, it's just, though it shows a superiority, but it's not, I'm not very gung-ho about
maybe a take-home message for, as of now, for small cell lung cancer would be that as per the Caspian late results, we continue Durva as the standard of care.
Yeah, so basically we can see that among the PDL1 versus PD1, I think somehow in small cell lung cancer, the PDL1 drugs are showing a better result than the PD1. That's a very broad aim, but you see Atezo and Durva both in a group, and Nivo and Pembro comes in other group. So both Atezo and Durva is showing, I think, though I again...
I think you have partially answered this question. Dr. Singhal, would you add on to it? Selection criteria for choice of immuno in
no selection criteria. Means all comers, one can take on to immunochemotherapy of combination.
Okay.
One is not a selection, it doesn't help selection.
So what are the challenges, Dr. Harshvardhan? What are the challenges? I think major challenge could be the cost. Any other challenges? Availability of drugs, anything? Dr. Harshvardhan isn't there. I think Dr. Panda and Dr. Singhal are...
Yeah. I think cost is definitely a big issue. 95% of our patients, even in Apollo, cannot afford durvalumab or atezolizumab. So we must understand. So the biggest cost is challenge is cost, and there are also comorbidities. Many of our patients have other comorbidities. Many of them are diabetics. Maybe have other autoimmune disease, old history of tuberculosis. So there is also always risk of flare of different conditions. And Atezo, we have seen some sudden deterioration in neurotoxicity, some neurological effects. So in some patients, so as immunotherapy, when the toxicity can happen, they can be really bad. So
yeah, thank you, sir. So since we are talking of changing, landscape and increased number of agents being available for small cell, any experience for taxanes? Both of you, any of you use taxanes in limited stage small cell lung cancer?
I have not used. Manish can tell.
So I think taxanes do very well as far as limited or any small cell lung cancer is there, but it is generally used as a second line drug, not as a front line drug.
Mm-hmm. So our options would be just the standard carbo-eto or cis-eto, and if we can add
option.
Yeah. So I think I've been resting my radiation colleagues for a long time. So we come back to the abstract, which was talking about the efficacy of standard versus the high dose twice daily thoracic radiation in limited small cell lung cancer. So this was the study design beautifully presented by Dr. Rambha, and this was the basis that accelerated hyperfractionation gives the opportunity for better cell kill by shortening the treatment time, although there's some confusion with regards to whether toxicity would be added. So Dr. Jagtap, what exactly is the current practice? Dr. Rambha also touched upon in her presentation that the practices are different, but we talk of different standards of care. So what is the current practice of fractionation in limited stage small cell lung cancer?
Even though the twice daily fractionation is considered as a standard, we don't use that double fractionation in India. I don't think any center is using that. We already said in the presentation. So generally we use the fractionation of around 54 to 60 gray with a conventional fractionation of 2 gray. That has been followed most of the centers all over India. I don't think
Dr.
anybody
Charu?
is doing.
Yeah. Dr. Charu, do you also use once daily fractionation or twice? Is Dr. Charu there? Dr. Dudul, can you just check a phone? I cannot.
Sorry. I had unmuted. So I'm saying, yes, even we are following the one daily fractionation regimen only. Only 2 patients we had treated with twice a day fractionation. I think logistics is the main issue.
So I think you partially mentioned. So it is seen that BID is mainly used in the academic institute. But are you also concerned that there is more toxicity in the BD regimen?
Kanika, like the CONVERT trial which was there, which compared your 66 gray versus 45 and 30, there the toxicities were same. Esophagitis, pneumonitis was same. And on the contrary, the patients who underwent 45 gray and 30 fractions, they're like almost 15% more than the 66 gray 33 arm patients were able to complete the treatment.
So I think because CONVERT is the current era practice. And we talk about
3D IMRT, yes.
So this is a very nice abstract which I came across. This is our practices in US. We think that in India we are probably not offering the best of care to our patients, but look at the patterns of practice. 3/4 of their people don't give BD regimens. Out of the 300 plus US radiation oncologists, 3/4 of them still practice once daily, which is in best of the centers. And these are again pertaining to the logistic difficulties. Somewhere the patient cannot come twice, and somewhere the provider does not have that logistic. And it is seen that even if you have the option, they ask if you prefer, and if you said, would you want to go BD? So even if you have the option of giving BD, still only 15% more say that yes, we will give BD. Still the practices are not the standard as we say here. So I think that line that accelerated radiation is the standard is just a theoretical line. In practice, none of us are using this. So what are the common toxicities which you actually see in small cell lung cancer? Why we are worried for small cell lung cancer? Dr. Jagtap, can you take that?
Generally, they are quite extensive disease, and most of the time with the bulky nodes, and we need to cover those areas. So most of the time, the esophagitis and the brachial plexopathy are the common side effects which we had seen, and sometimes pneumonitis can also be a common finding in most of these patients. But is what we had seen in our practice.
So, Dr. Charu, any additional comment on that?
No, I think esophagitis is the most difficult to manage during radiation and chemo together. And pneumonitis, yes, but I think the rates have drastically come down with the IMRT techniques.
So I would agree, because as we can see in this picture, when small cell lung cancer usually has a mediastinal disease which practically makes esophagus not even identifiable on scan. So we end up treating the esophagus to the entire dose we give to the tumor. So that is the reason we have so much of esophagitis. And this was a concern in the previous landmark trials also, where grade 3 to grade 4 esophagitis has been very high. And the intensity of esophagitis has been high both in BD, which was in the RTOG 9609, as well as the OD regimen. But as you said rightly, in the CONVERT, the esophagitis was low. So was in this particular study. So any comment, Dr. Charu? This particular study also, esophagitis, irrespective of increasing the dose to 60 gray, seems to be pretty low.
I think, Kanika, because now we are able to delineate the esophagus and control the doses to it. And at times, if we think that esophagus is getting too much of dose, we even do adaptive. So we change our plans after 4 or 5 weeks. So I think that is where the esophagitis rates are coming down.
So basically, that is the point I wanted to highlight also, that the trials which we always take as landmark and standard need to be